huge productivity gains every year. We have to reinvent. We have to innovate. We have to get more productive. And I applaud you for taking some steps down that path, steps toward regional cooperation on economic development, steps toward promoting collaboration between different local governments, the Efficient Gov contest. I love that idea, and I'm not at all surprised that you got 65 responses. I think it's terrific. But as you well know, you'll need to do more. In fact, my argument this morning is that we need to change the basic model that in the public sector that we inherited from the past. The form of organization we inherited is called bureaucracy. It's not the only form of organization possible. It is a particular kind of organization which flourished during the industrial era and was probably the best way you could organize things given the realities 100 years ago. But bureaucracies are built to repel innovation. And in bureaucracy, collaboration is an unnatural act between unconsenting adults. So we need to transcend this form of organization. It's time to leave it behind. And this is nothing new. The private sector's been doing this for 30 years. What do I mean by bureaucracy? Well, think about how we created government programs, government organizations in the industrial era. Centralized, hierarchical, lots of layers, controlled through rules and regulations. Their job was to deliver standardized services. What do I mean by that? I mean the same services to everybody. There wasn't any of this customization. Do you remember when you went to public school? How many of you went to public school? I bet most people in here went to public school. I did. You know, the ideology of the day was that it was the fair thing was to teach all of us exactly in the same way. When I was in high school, they did away with tracking, you know, no more honors programs. It was unfair to treat some kids different than others. Well, you know, the academics have proven that kids have many different learning styles, and if you treat them all the same way, educate them all the same way, you're being profoundly unfair to about 80% of them. But these bureaucracies were built to treat everybody the same way. That was a virtue. They operated in command and control fashion. You know, the professionals and the bureaucrats had the control, and the people they're, quote, serving, the customers, although we didn't call them that in that day, had no control at all whatsoever in the exchange. And they were mostly organized as monopolies. So that's sort of an abstract of what I mean by bureaucracy. Max Weber, about 100 years ago, called it the most perfect form of organization possible. And at the time, when you didn't have computers, when the workforce was uneducated, when change was slow, it was probably true. We built bureaucracy to solve a lot of problems. In the 19th century, we didn't use bureaucracy in most governments. We had small governments. They were informal. They were patronage-ridden. You know, in urban school districts, when the Democrats won an election on the school board, they'd fire the Republican teachers and hire Democrats. And when the Republicans won, they'd fire the Democratic teachers and hire Republicans. That's why we have tenure. So it was very different back then. We created bureaucracy to solve these problems of corruption and patronage, and it worked. It worked. And the interesting thing was it worked for quite a while. The history of government in the 20th century is a history of success. You know, we won two world wars. We beat the Depression. We built the most powerful economy on earth. Between 1945 and 1970, the real per capita wealth in this country doubled. Incredible success. Bureaucracies provided security and stability. They controlled that corruption that was so rampant 100 years ago. They created a sense of accountability. And they delivered those services we wanted in the industrial era. You know, they built the mass public education system. They built roads and highways. They built water systems and sewer systems and all that infrastructure. It was a story of great success. And then the world changed. Then the industrial era began to die, and what we now call the information age began to emerge, and all the underlying realities changed. Think about it. We have organizations built to be stable, and we live in a world of very rapid change today. We have organizations that use traditional work processes. I do my job, I hand it to Fred, he does his job, he hands it to Jane, she does her job, etc. And we live in a world of information technologies when all that can be done simultaneously and quickly and online. We live in a world where government got used to, being able to be good enough for government work. The standards weren't that high. And today, the public expects a lot more. My favorite example is the post office. Remember when you were a kid, how you felt about the post office? You probably knew your mailman. It was a great institution. Americans were very proud of it. I could prove to you with data that it works better today than it did then. But how do you feel about it now? What does going postal mean? Why the change? Why don't we love it anymore? I'd say 2 words: Federal Express. The private sector has raised the bar. We think a great organization gets it there overnight, guaranteed, or your money back. So the public has gotten used, the private sector has raised the bar. The public's gotten used to higher quality and wants it from government. We also have organizations built to deliver those standardized services, one size fits all, and we've all got used to lots of choices. Again, when we were growing up, we lived in a mass society. We had 3 TV networks, there were 3 dominant news magazines. That's all gone. We live in a world of choice today, and yet we hit the public sector, and so often we don't have choice. And a lot of you have experienced it when you sent your kids to public school. And you realized, oh my God, Johnny's going to be taught exactly the way everybody else is taught, and he's different. I have 4 kids, and they're all different. They learn in different ways. I've got a son who's an engineer. We knew he was an engineer when he was 3. And my daughters are very different. So people want different kinds of schools for different kids. And that's happening, but not fast enough. So it leads to a lot of frustration. We live in a world of global competition. We all know how that affects business. We all know it means business has to be very nimble, very fast on its feet, able to innovate rapidly. But what about government? If business is regulated by slow-moving bureaucracies, and if its infrastructure is built by slow-moving bureaucracies, and if its workforce is educated by slow-moving bureaucracies, and if the customs service and all the other things related to trade are run by slow-moving bureaucracies, business is at a competitive disadvantage, which is why business has been the driving force for education reform for the last 25 years, because they desperately need a better workforce. So that global competition affects government as well. And finally, I've showed you the fiscal picture. These government bureaucracies, between 1900 and 1975, we spent an average of 5% more on government every year. And they're built for that. They expect that. That's the norm. And those days are gone. So the point is, it's not that we have bad people in government. We have outdated systems built for a different day. And they're increasingly dysfunctional in the reality we face today. So how do we change them? How do we get organizations that can flourish in today's world? Innovative, agile, flexible organizations, responsive organizations, organizations that embrace continuous improvement, that get more productive every year. That's the question. And that's what I've been working on ever since Reinventing Government was a bestseller and changed my life. It was actually a descriptive book, and yet it felt like everybody in the world was calling and saying, how do we do this? So I've done a lot of research since then and come up with some answers that I want to share with you. And I want to start by saying, think of public organizations as biological organisms. The metaphor we used for government in the industrial era was a mechanical metaphor. We showed people an org chart. But writers are now saying, no, that's, these aren't machines. These are complex adaptive systems. These are much more like biological organisms. So if you were to think about a biological organism,